taking the time to discuss this very interesting topic. And I would also like to thank to my dear colleagues Rafael Zanatta and Sara Collins, which I'll kindly ask them to introduce themselves. Do you want to go first, Sara?
Sure. Hi, my name is Sara Collins. I work for Public Knowledge, which is a US-based nonprofit. I'm a policy counsel there working on our Gov Affairs team. So I cover quite a lot of different tech policy issues, but my expertise is in privacy. So I'm really happy to be here with all of you today.
Thank you, Sara. Rafa?
Hi, I'm Rafael Zanatta. I'm the director of Data Privacy Brazil Research Association. It's a nonprofit organization based in São Paulo. It's one of the first NGOs totally focused on personal data protection. And it's part of the coalition Rights on the Network. It's a coalition of more than 40 NGOs in Brazil. And we all have been involved in the drafting and the enactment of the Brazilian data protection law in 2018. So now we're trying to implement the legislation that we built. It's a big effort, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, thank you so much for being here, folks. And well, I'll be your host. My name is Gaspar Pisanu. I'm the Latin Policy Manager for Access Now. And I've been working a lot with an internal group we have where we discuss mainly things about data protection. And as part of my work, I've been in the last in this past year, I have to say, I've been working on this topic, data ownership. We'll introduce some of our positions, our thoughts. I think there's nothing close when it comes to this topic. And then we want to have like a good amount of time to discuss also with our attendees. So to kick off this presentation, I have to say that personally, I think it's really great. We were just talking with Rafael about this discussion keep remaining being an ongoing discussion. When I start researching about this topic, my first conclusion, I started reading a lot of doctrine, and then I moved to different organization positions. But I read a lot of the academic papers about this topic. And my first conclusion was that the analysis of this topic should be split and at the same time combined. And let me explain you. In one hand, we have like the more theoretical analysis, and in the other, we have like a pragmatic one that is directly connected to that theoretic analysis, right? When we start studying this issue from an academic point of view, and I'm sure that most of you have seen and read the enormous amount of literature, the positions and the many edges of data ownership, I think we can all agree that most of the positions of the academic position about data ownership are very well argumented, right? Both in favor, against, and there are a lot of them somewhat they're in the middle, right? What I did find, was that in most cases, the goal of each position was to empower users, right? So trying to find the legal nature, legal concepts, legal frameworks, or set of rules in order to give more control to people over their data. And at the same time, trying to find a balance in this unbalanced relationship right now, that is this connection between users and big platforms and data processors, right? But the thing in the public discourse is a little bit different, right? And this is like the practical application of those theories. I think, as we said in the description of this session, we must consider that a one-fits-all global answer might not be possible nor useful, right? Legal tradition and systems, jurisprudence, doctrine change a lot from one region from another, and even between countries from a same continent, right? And also, we need to consider the political context of each region and each country. That's not something that we can left aside, because law has always been a tool to enforce social change or to adjust to that social change, right? So you can never leave that aside. And this is because a laudable, well-founded legal position about ownership might produce terrible results in certain countries, right? We are very aware of that. And there is another issue when you see public or private actors debate about data ownership. And I think this is a very relevant issue that we are facing when we are studying the more theoretical, when we are creating theoretical arguments to support or to be against data ownership. I think that there are many actors who try to use some of these arguments to support a narrative that plays in their favors. This is something that I identified so many times, and I think you will share it with me. They use a lot what it's called the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. This name comes from a joke about a Texan who fires some gunshots to the side of a barn, and then after shooting, he paints a target centered on the tightest cluster of hits and claims to be a sharpshooter. Translated to the world of argumentation, this means that this happens when someone does not arrive to a conclusion based on evidence. Instead, they previously decide what they want to believe, what they want to support, and then find the arguments to support that idea, right? So we see this a lot when it comes to deciding policies or adopting positions, right? They tend to adopt those positions that plays in their favors. But what's the real risk behind this? The biggest risk is that it oversimplifies the issue. And this session tries to show that, right? That is far from simple. It's also dangerous because most arguments, there are a lot of arguments that are very reachable for the general public. And make this person supporting these arguments sound convincing because they are supporting the theories, their position on academic positions, right? So the way I see it, I think it's our duty to understand and address each of these narratives from a global, but mainly from a regional perspective, because this will change from one region to another. That discourse is what, in the end, influences the adoption of policies, of laws, of legal frameworks. Something that I liked really much was a white paper by Patrick Hummel, Matthias Braun, and Peter Dabrock. I'm reading their names so I don't forget. It's a paper called On Data, Ethical Reflections on Data Ownership. And they say specifically that there is a need for conceptual clarification, not only because of the somewhat contested legal status of data ownership, but also because there are commentaries on the topic that oscillates between poles that concern primarily pre- or paralegal questions. I mean, this is previous to the legal analysis, right? This is what I'm talking about, what the social context reflects on law. And I also should add that it's not also concerns about pre- and paralegal questions, but also consequences, right, of these issues. I know that for now I've been a little bit too abstract, so let me give you some examples of what I'm saying. When we talk about data ownership, we mostly assume that we are talking about private property, right? Which, according to these theory supporters, it's a way for people to have more control over their data, right? What hides behind the idea of private property, and that sometimes, and I would like to say most times, is missed, is that once you accept the idea of private property, you necessarily have to accept the idea of collective and common property. And the fact is that it just requires a law to make something that is private property a common or a collective property. Now, imagine those countries where we have very weakened democracies or even authoritarian countries, authoritarian regimes, sorry. They could easily sustain, with the same arguments that you sustain private property, that there are reasons for this data to be a common good, right? Now, I don't need to explain the dangers of this authoritarian regime holding every citizen's data, right? Another example, and I think this is a very interesting one, there is a common understanding that data is non-rivalrous, right? That means that data can be easily be shared without losing value to others, and at the same time, it's a non-excludable right or asset, whatever you want to call it. Meaning that someone accessing that data doesn't imply excluding others from doing so. But there is a very interesting analysis made by Purtova that understand that the information industry has already a de facto claim, an exclusive right over the use of personal data they collect, since other companies, for example, can access that information. They maintain it as like the secret formula of a soda, right? And in the end, this monopolistic condition that I think we are seeing a lot right now when we are talking about antitrust and how important is data held by companies, I think that what she sustains is that this condition leaves individuals defenseless in face of the corporate power eroding his or her autonomy. So we see here that something that we are very used to say that is non-excludable and non-rivalrous, that is something that I still sustain, can be also discussed. I will try to make this a little bit faster so we can have time to discuss. But I would like to say, try to closing my presentation and my thoughts about this, is that this lack of conceptual clarification, we also need to add that sometimes these concepts are short-sighted views of the context, right? There was a very interesting argument made by Martin Tisne. I can then share a lot of their work, these things that I'm quoting. At a session we had in RightsCon this year, where he said that most of the debate about ownership originates in the US. I'm pretty sure that Sara will give us a lot of that context too. But it's true, and in the US, property rights have traditionally been seen as a key to economic freedom, or I would dare to say to freedom directly. While in Europe, the focus is on a larger set of values, mainly to self-determination as a fundamental right of human dignity and private autonomy, right? And something very similar happens in Latin America, where we see that these kind of rights that are more linked to our dignity, we call it personality rights. There is a lot of discussion also if it's a personal or a personality right? So basically, when we want to answer the question to this session title, not own, then what? We need to have a very clear understanding of our context and our legal traditions and our jurisprudence, and how all these factors have played in the social arena. Based on that, we need to analyze which legal framework would fit best in our countries and in our regions that ensures and foster data protection rights, which is what I said also the goal, for example, of academics. Which is the legal framework that will give us control, real control over our data. The one balancing this unbalanced relationship that I mentioned before. In fact, I think to be intellectually honest, we need to first determine if this is the first aspect we want to discuss about data protection and personal data, right? So in some countries, they may not want to view data as ownable, but rather they might try to focus on protections against certain kind of data collection or certain use of data. I think that personally that data ownership is in the best scenario solving some of the issues that are related to privacy. And so even in jurisdictions where it might be a good approach, it is still insufficient on its own to protect privacy. To end this introduction, I like to say that this is, as I said many times, this is one of the many edges of data protection, where we need to stand and fight for a human rights approach. We strongly oppose the idea that countries where governments choose to actively protect people's rights are saying that the battle to data protection was lost. Right? This is just another narrative to make us concede and give up on a great result that I think we already achieved. Like, we already see that people is most aware than ever about their privacy. We see laws that are trying to improve the conditions of users where there were previously nothing ruling that scenario. So I invite all of you to use our knowledge, our intellectual thirst, and the law to sustain these principles and to fight back. This was my presentation. I would love now to hear Sarah's position, if you may, please.
Hi, yes. So I think I agree mostly with what Gaspar has been saying. And to give a little bit of context about the US position and sort of, again, why the US has sort of had a focalization around this idea, it helps to understand some background about, weirdly enough, our bankruptcy laws. So we come from the common law tradition from England, and for a lot of reasons that I'm not going to get into because it's boring and it's not worth it. Part of our bankruptcy tradition means a selling off of assets and using and understanding those assets to be a part of a calculation of what you owe to your creditors. Well, data sets, as they became more and more prevalent and more useful, became much easier to commoditize in bankruptcy, but also in sales of companies. That was part of their worth. And so as a response to this growing commoditization and assigning of value to these large data sets these companies were having and becoming public either through a merger and acquisition or through a bankruptcy, a movement came up that we need to own our data. We need a piece of that pie because, as Gaspar said, the US has a really, equates personal freedom with economic freedom a lot of times. So the idea is if I get my piece of the pie, I get a cut, I'm being valued. That also kind of connects to how the US talks about privacy harms. It's actually really hard to convince people that you can be harmed non-monetarily. Like when I talk about privacy problems and privacy harms, oftentimes people will say, oh, like identity theft. And it's like, yes, that's bad, but that's not really what I'm talking about. When I talk about harms to your dignity and autonomy, that's viewed with skepticism because you can't put a price on it. So this data ownership and sort of commoditization and this narrative coming out of this in the US really has to do with that tradition of looking at legal harms as financial harms and looking at different assets and different parts of companies and different parts of people as financial fundamentally. We think this reduction doesn't make sense for a lot of reasons, but I'm going to just highlight three. The first one, data doesn't look anything like what we think of property. Again, I'm going to call back to the English common law tradition. Property in our property law all comes back down to land. Land is unique. It's easy to exclude people from. You are assumed to have complete dominion and control over it. That's not really true for your data. Like, I introduced myself. I said, hi, I'm Sarah. I work at Public Knowledge. I gave you that information, but you can see me on a screen and you can hear me. So you've probably inferred I am a woman. You may not know my pronouns necessarily, but you've made that inference. If you look behind me, you can see some paintings. You may be able to infer my class or my wealth status. Now, I didn't give that to you, but this data, this observational data that we have amongst ourselves is part of why personalizing data or making data ownership is so difficult. It's because data isn't just an identifier of you, it's everything about you, it's your personality. And that's not something you can just control who has access to easily. We move through space. Another reason we think data ownership or this strand of thought has taken off in the US is because it's very easily sloganable and there's something intuitive about it. What it implies is that you have control and autonomy over your data, which we agree, that's really important. But unlike in property, control and ownership mean specific things, and you can't do that with data. If you exclude Facebook or one of our big telecom companies from accessing data about you, what does that mean that you've allowed your friends and family or even strangers to have access to certain pieces of data? In a property law discourse, that would weigh heavily about whether or not you properly excluded Facebook and AT&T. The legal framework, at least again, I'm talking about the English common law tradition, I realize there are many, makes it really difficult to use data as property as a narrative. The third thing I'm going to say, and this often gets glossed over, and I don't understand why, is data ownership and data as property is often put forth as a solution to privacy. It's like, this is how we take back our privacy. And it's unclear that that would do this. We already know that in the tech space, users don't have a ton of leverage to negotiate with companies. I don't negotiate with Facebook when I sign on. I don't negotiate with Twitter. They put up a privacy policy, they put up a terms of service, and I just had to say, okay. There is no reason to believe an ownership regime would be any different, except that I might get a few dollars back at the end of the day. That doesn't give me more autonomy or control. I mean, I guess I've been enriched slightly because of the value of my data, although I'd argue that I'm not going to be getting anywhere near what I value my data as, even if that's what the market values my data as. And there's really, really worrisome discriminatory impacts. Now, again, for myself, I'm a white woman in the US. I come from an upper middle class background. I am married and I have no kids yet. I am a marketer's dream. The only person that is more valuable, and I'm in my mid-30s, the only person that is more valuable to marketers is a woman who is currently pregnant. That is the only way I could make myself more valuable. Well, what about all these other people in the US who don't look like me, who aren't white, who aren't relatively wealthy, who don't have my level of education? I'm a lawyer. Their data is valued less by the market. We are institutionalizing that certain people are just more valuable than others. And there's something incredibly distasteful about that to me. I look forward to talking with all of you about this more, but I just wanted to sort of preview those 3 points because I think they're the most salient when discussing data ownership.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Yeah, and I think I was sure that we were touching that point of the monetization of data, right? Because See, that's very interesting. That's the way I see it, that's just one aspect of how to dealing with private property, right? I mean, and I have my arguments to say that monetization is one of the worst ideas for that case to advance on giving people control over their data. If we still care about privacy, right? Because we have that as a base. Like, if you care about privacy, you'll try to enforce it. If you don't care, well, then that's another discussion. Before we move forward, I would like to hear your opinion, Rafa. And I know that you're working in Brazil, but I know that you have so many experience in so many parts of the world. So I would love to know more what you think about this.
Thanks. I think I will speak from a Brazilian point of view, and mainly from how is our legal thinking about personal data in Brazil or in Latin America. So let me begin with the case decided by the Supreme Court in May this year, in which we participated, in which the court was deciding a case in which the federal government was trying to retrieve personal data from telecommunication operators. They wanted to get the data of more than 200 million people in Brazil in order to conduct research because of the effects of the pandemics, COVID. So they wanted to get the numbers and the names so they could make telephone calls to people and ask, what is the level of unemployment in your household? How is your life being affected by COVID? And despite the fact that this sounded like a reasonable purpose for the governments to get access to that data, the court decided that there was not a substantial level of safeguards and protection, that the government will not misuse that personal data. And the court recognized two things very important. First, that personal data protection is a fundamental right, and it is separated from privacy rights. Second, that personal data protection it is linked with personality rights. In fact, in the Brazilian data protection law, it is clearly stated in the first article of the legislation that personal data protection aims at the protection of personality and human development. So it is much more linked with this dignitarian approach of conceiving personal data as the projection of your personality, and something that is not commodifiable in the traditional legal thinking. So if you go back to where this idea comes from, this idea of direitos da personalidade, personality rights in Brazilian legal thinking, it was developed conceptually in the beginning of the last century based on a set of ideas of European legal thinkers, such as legal theorist Otto von Guercke, famous legal thinker in Germany, that believed that private law should serve common goals, and at the same time, public law must look towards the individuals. So there was no clear distinction between private law and public law. And moreover, he also said that there should be a special role of law to determine the conditions of the human development, situations in which a member of the community could also have and acquire the opportunity and the capacity to develop himself, being attached to the community but having the conditions to develop. This is the idea that comes really strong in the mind of Brazilian legal thinkers in the beginning of last century, when they theorize about personality right as something that is absolute, it is extra patrimonial, it's non-transferable, it is non-prescriptible, and it is vital and necessary. So if you look to our Brazilian Civil Code of 2002, which provides whole legal architecture, it has a chapter on personality rights. And it says that personality rights are extra patrimonial. They should not be treated as commodity. This is very much connected with the legal thinking of Italian scholars like Stefano Rodota, a famous legal thinker that was responsible for developing the field of data protection since 1973, when he published a famous book about social control and electronic laboratories. And Rodota was a clear influence in the Brazilian data protection legislation. Actually, he came to our country several times. He was the professor of many of our lawyers that wrote the legislation. And I believe that Brazilians have a very clear approach on this dignitarian perspective, which really clashes with the idea that personal data could be considered as a commodity or as an asset in this so-called proprietarian approach. So there is a fabulous paper. I sent this paper to Gaspar. It was written by Salome Viljoen. It was written last month. It's about it's a relational theory of data in which she claims a perspective on democratic data and democratic approaches on data commons and data governance, and in which I think she just nails it, because she describes the big intellectual clash of our time in the field of personal data between these two fields. The proprietarians, so this whole set of community that are saying that, well, commodification is already going on. We must discuss the distributional aspect of it. Who should get benefit from something that it is already occurring? Data is already being extracted and they are getting value, and it is a resource. And so that we should think about how to move from this de facto situation to this so-called de jure situation, in which you must have property rights over your data. You should benefit from that, and you should be able to not only to control in the Alan Westin approach of privacy as control, but more than that, there should have institutions and social relations designed so you can have economic benefits from the use and extraction of your data. This is the proprietarian approach that Salome describes in her paper, which is also, it's linked with this whole tech clash and this whole new Brundisian approach of rethinking the economics of the internet and the problem of economic concentration, and proprietarian approaches being also an opportunity to also fight back this phenomenon of concentration of big techs and big platforms. But we know that there are many problems in this approach. I have read many papers from these authors. So a famous book, Radical Markets by Posner and Glenn Weil, other books which are claiming this institutional system of micropayments in which people should get benefit not only from the data itself, but the role of the data in machine learning and improving AI system, and somehow provide traceability to put back micropayments for each person. And there are a lot of arguments saying, well, this is, it's impractical. It's almost impossible to implement in the technical level. There are many papers fighting back and saying that it is impossible. and they did not show that it is possible. But despite the fact that there is this technical debate, there is also a very strong argument, which I agree, which is, well, maybe if you really develop this market and you allow that poor people in highly unequal societies, such as Brazil, which has a deep problem of structural inequality, you would probably separate society in two levels of citizenship. Those that would have the economic conditions to pay for everything that has privacy by design, and it can protect their data, and the whole class of people unemployed or just getting social benefits, trying to negotiate a little bit of value from their data in order to get some kind of improvement in their life. And this would not solve the problem of privacy erosion that we are witnessing in the past decade with the problem of the economic model of how the platform economy is going on. So there are very strong critiques of this proprietarian approach. And another one is that there is this illusion that the problem is about the capacity of individual control or individual payment or remuneration, so to speak. Because as I think Stefano Rodotà clearly saw that in 1974 when he was in a conference by OECD, and he said, we should tackle the problems of data protection, not focusing on individual, but on focusing on community and how data is relational. It matters about trying to get value from possible prediction on who you are based on a set of relations of a social group. It is actually trying to extract value from behaviors of communities and not only yourself. I mean, Sara is not important. Gaspar is not important. Rafael is not important from the digital economy at all. They just want to know is Rafael a lawyer in his 30s, father of two, living in the countryside of Brazil, maybe, and is his set of social relations have any relation with a field or social group that we know about, so we can make predictions on what we will do. So the abusive effects are social, so and not only individual. And by focusing only in solving the problem of getting some value or adopting this proprietarian approach individually, you don't even touch the surface of the problem of the abusive discrimination and the social problems that are going on. So I think that even if we move forward in the next 10 years with this technical solutions, as we are seeing, we have Tim Berners-Lee working with SOLID, we have Stefano Quintarelli and Italian mathematicians working with the interplanetary file system. We have this whole community working on building new protocols for the web, so you can trace back who produced the data, and you can have personal data pods, so you can get some micro payments instantly. This will not solve the major problems that we have been discussing the past 40 years about what truly matters in data protection. So I think that even if we advance, it does not resolve the major problems. I think the discussion should be about the capacity of people to have their voice democratically on thinking data as a relational asset, and somehow develop. In some cities, it is possible, as we're seeing in Barcelona with the Decode project, as we're seeing in some experimental projects in South America as well, to think data commons in the city. For instance, if you have an IoT system that is enriching because of the data of the citizens that are walking over the street and somewhat, people should get back the right to decide collectively on what should be the extraction and the value of that data, to maybe invest in public schools in their own city. So it's not about getting paid individually, but to recognize that the value of the data in this scenario is collectively, and also manage the value collectively, deciding in the city, for instance. So I think that there are other possible solutions that do not involve this narrow down thinking of property rights in the traditional terms of the individual dominion. So there are much more legal possibilities beyond that.
Thank you so much, Rafa. Very interesting points you made. I think we could spend hours talking about this. I mean, I was thinking of questions just to, with the only objective of contradicting you and see how we can move forward on these ideas, right? But it seems like, as you said, it's a larger, I think, discussion. And I completely agree with that. Leaving aside my desires to make so many questions to both of you, I would like to ask to our audience, if you want to raise your hands, if you want to participate, make questions, please write them in the chat. I think you can even open your microphones, so please let us know. Since there is no one yet, I would like to make a question made by Milton Pedraza. I think it's more of a point. He says that we can have common use of data and still compensate each individual for the use. Why not eliminate inequity by compensating people even when their data is used even for a common good? And you can license data, not sell it, just like Taylor Swift has copyright to her song. Then he said, Facebook can access your data and you can download it and license it. I don't know if any of you would like to address that point. Sara, maybe?
So I just want to jump in on the copyright thing, because this is something we hear a lot. And I'd like to push back because, again, the copyright regime is something that is often brought up as like, this is how we would do it in the US. And there's a couple reasons why I don't think it would work. One, copyright is fundamentally about original works and things of original authorship. And we have lots of case law in the US that facts are not original authorship. So squaring that circle just legally in the US would be really difficult, because like what my name is and how that all works just doesn't live in the copyright regime. The other thing about the copyright regime, just as a framework and not necessarily a direct port, is copyright is designed so that artists and creators can keep making more art and creative works and novels and all that great stuff. I don't know that we want people creating more data or putting more data in the world. I don't know if that's like an incentive we want to create for a data protection place. Like we want people to have autonomy to do so, but I don't know that we want to incentivize it.
I think Milton wants to add a few more comments about that. Please open your microphone and go ahead, Milton. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, perfectly.
So I admire and respect, and I know that we are all well-intentioned people, so let me put that up front. But I do believe that one of the ways to help decrease inequality is to allow people to license their data. And I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm a very poor person, but I have a genetic makeup that holds one of the clues to solve cancer, one type of cancer, or heart disease. And 100 laboratories around the world want me to be a participant in their studies. I believe that not only should every laboratory pay that person, but that when the solution to cancer is found and the data of that individual, that poor individual, was used, they should have a lifetime royalty stream from the entities. One of the challenges I have with the common good concept is that the common good is used by pharmaceutical companies and they're going to make all the profits. But the poor individuals whose data was used, they are never compensated for having the lucky, and okay, there's luck and there's skill, the luck to have that genetic makeup that solved the cure for cancer. So I would like that individual, that poor person. And I think, you know, I'm Colombian, okay? And I'm an immigrant to the United States. I think that people who have never been poor should never try to pass judgment and pretend they have empathy on what poor people feel. And I think people, and I've been very lucky, so I've become wealthy. I think people who have never been wealthy should never pass judgment on the wealthy. But everybody's entitled to their free speech. But I think unless you've navigated that journey, you do not know what the poor people want. And that's why most nonprofits fail, because they have no idea what poor people want. And they also misjudge rich people because they don't understand them either. So I think that people should be compensated, of course, nobody owns I don't own my passport number. I don't own my driver's license number. I don't own this conversation. We all do. But there are clearly some parts of your data that can be owned and in my opinion, can be licensed to help all kinds of people to reduce inequality, to help them earn, money for their retirement, money for their children's education. If we're taking data from children to get a college fund, and I'll stop there to get your opinions.
Thank you so much, Milton. We really appreciate to hear everyone's thoughts about this. If I may, I want to do a very short response to that, and I'll leave it to my colleagues. I see Ingrid writing in the comments. If you want to speak it out loud, Ingrid, you are most welcome to do so. So I think it's a very valid point, and it's something that is a very used argument regarding the monetization or the commodification of data. I'm not so sure, unfortunately, that it's going to be a way to solve inequity. And let me give you some examples. First of all, it's very difficult, not to say impossible, to determine the value of data, right? So you have different examples. When Mark Zuckerberg was asked about how much would he pay for the data, he said something about $17 the quarter. When you have a world where most people live with $2 a day, that's an important amount. That maybe not for the US. So you have already the issue with the context. But there is another case, like the Cambridge Analytica one, when the records show that the ones hiring them paid around 70 cents of US dollars per each voter's information. So you have first an issue there. And I think there's a distinction between recognizing that something has value and from commodifying it. The example I like to use, and this is linked to what Rafael was saying about how this personal data and data protection is linked to dignity, is imagine if someone misused that data, right? Because the example you gave us is a great use of data, and we definitely encourage that kind of activities. But we see, unfortunately, there are way too many cases of misuse of data. So how would you then establish a value for that harm?
Let me give you an example to answer to you.
Okay.
So right now, when I joined the Marriott program, I get nights free, right? So my opinion is that unlike Uber, brands should send an offer to consumers, to their customers, for example, for data, right? But remember that with Edge AI, it's not the data that companies want. They want the insight to try to inspire you to buy. And unlike digital platforms, they are not trying to manipulate you or brainwash you. They're trying to sell something to you. So you have to separate the digital platforms from legitimate brands that want to do commerce. We have supply and we have demand. If a company sends me an offer and says, Milton, Netflix, I'm going to give you 3 months of free viewing if you provide me your Facebook or your Google data, I can decide as a consumer, I want to do it or I don't want to do it. And by the way, we can have lawyers, we can have negotiators represent consumers if we create a data market. They're not going to be helpless because I can guarantee you that just like there are lawsuits when people have accidents in cars, there's going to be an army of lawyers that are going to want to represent the consumers. So it will not be inequitable. It will be symmetrical. And so I think there's an opportunity to create markets where consumers are represented by equally tough negotiators. And think about this. Since data is non-rivalrous, you have an opportunity to have thousands of companies ask you to license their data. So I can get free nights from Marriott. I can get upgrades and points from Delta. I can get a lower interest rate from my bank. Think about what that accumulates into if you allow the demand and supply system to work. It can be thousands of dollars for anyone, potentially, right? Think about medical data, financial data. I'm just thinking right now about consumer goods and services data. If data is really non-rivalrous, then thousands of companies will want your data. And by the way, they don't need to have the data identified. The data can be anonymous. The data can be protected. The data can reside, if we have Edge AI, in your personal data pod. Let's say I want to do your credit score. I send the algorithm by consent into your cell phone. The data has never been touched by me. Your privacy can be maintained, unless, of course, you want to identify yourself because you need a loan from the bank. But you do that anyway. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Milton, for sharing. Yeah, I have a lot of response. I would like to know, Ingrid, if you would like to respond. So we have a real conversation. It's not just the three of us answering.
Yeah, I can try to respond. It's very late in the night already here, but I think it's really an illusion to think that you can really benefit poor people by allowing them to sell their data, because can you
I
understand?
didn't say sell their data. I said license their data.
Yeah,
and by the way, they are not licensing their data. They're licensing
excuse
the
me,
insights
you
about their
spoke for a
data.
long time.
Milton.
Now, please let me
Yes.
also develop some thoughts. I think it's really it's not a good idea, because it will also incite people to give away more data than they might want to give or should give away, because it might also cause harm and discrimination and stigmatization to them if they give away lots of information about themselves. And we know that credit scores are based on rating, ranking, and scoring people. So I think it can be even dangerous to give away your privacy just because you expect a little bit of money for it. And I don't think it will in any way equalize social inequalities. I don't think, because the power relations will be maintained. There is a lot of power asymmetry between dispersed individuals trying to somehow license their data, if you want to say this word, and the data aggregation companies. So in that respect also, I mean, if you would like to set up such a system, you would also, this system of micropayments like Jaron Lanier proposed, would also require that you log every move on your internet, on the internet, everything you do on your smartphone. So it would also contribute to a surveillance capitalism system. So in that respect, I also think it's a bad idea. It's really a bad idea to incentivize people to get some money for the data. And I very much agree with this concept of personality rights, of inalienability of certain data, and of sensitive data, which must be protected. And this is why we have data protection laws. And this is also why we need to preserve and to develop other mechanisms for protecting people. Thank you very much.
May I respond?
I would, yes, if you can make it quickly so we can have time for
I think
others.
that data is like fire. When humans first discovered fire, they began to use it for cooking and for heating. And of course, many people got burned, probably because they didn't learn. Today, when you fly a plane, you are flying a combustion engine, a combustion engine full of fuel. But you don't say, oh my God, fire, oh my God. So we have learned as humans to harness the power of the greatest fuel, fire, in order to serve, for the most part, human beings. Are there evil people who burn villages and burn people? Yes. Can people get burned by accidents? Yes. But for the most part, we as humans became able to develop systems that will allow us to use fire, a very dangerous resource, in order to serve human beings. I believe data is like that. And I believe in the future we will find that we can have laws, regulations, people who represent the interests of others, so that we can protect people and still use the value of data to enhance health, wealth, and lifestyle.
Thank you, Milton. Yeah, for me, it's very hard to think this in a Latin American context where it would be so dangerous for everyone, to someone having so much information. But I would like to hear more from Rafa, Sara, or if anyone wants to, from the audience, would like to speak. Please open your microphone.
Oh, Rafa, go ahead.
Thanks. I think the discussion is really nice, and I really like Milton's point because it's really provoking, and we should be tested with different ideas. And I think I'm part of a research center. It's an institute of the digital co-ops in the New School in New York. I've been working with Trevor Scholz and co-ops, and we had a meeting. We had a Brazilian mission going to this event in past November before COVID, and Brazil has a very strong cooperative scene, more than 7,000 co-ops, and most of them, which are like traditional, coming from fields like agriculture and logistics. They're moving towards the digital economy and trying to advance new models based on data. And not only that, but how to extract value from data and redistribute the value of data to the members of the co-op. And we met people from Savvy Co-op, which very much is connected with the example by Milton, because Savvy Co-op is a data co-op in the US, trying to bridge this large group of people who are providing very sensible information about their health when they're doing tests for the pharmaceutical industry and so on, with the co-op in the middle providing licensing schemes of the data to make sure that the payment and profits and revenues from extracting value from that data is channeled to the co-op, and it is collectively managed and redistributed to people. I really like this project, not only Savvy is one, but many data co-ops coming up, because I think that it tackles the problem of asymmetry of information. When you are alone doing that, because I do not believe that people alone trying to licensing their data in Brazil will work. But if they are protected in a collective structure, if they are a member of co-op, like living the life of the co-op, being part of it, having social relationships and understanding like the asymmetries of power and trying to understand if it is truly beneficial for that person to license their personal data, then I think it could work. And I really like that model. And I think Brazil has a very strong chance of in the future developing a lot of co-ops like that, because in the countryside, and I'm from the countryside, and I'm from a city with very strong co-ops called Maringá. I lived in São Paulo for many years, but from Maringá. And it's interesting to see if these new models are possible. And I think Milton's point is also a very interesting one regarding institutional imagination about new forms of rights. We should not be attached with the traditional models of property rights of the 21st century, of the 20th century, past century. And that's why I sent the link of Roberto Mangabeira's Unger book, The Knowledge Economy. Because Roberto Mangabeira is a Brazilian philosopher teaching in Harvard, and he's been saying that all the time, that property is a set of social relations, and law is frozen politics. We can recombine entitlements and immunities of property rights in very different scenarios. And we should do that in the digital economy. So this is interesting because it overcomes, as I said in my first part, the idea that the property right is the relationship between the person and the object. It is not. It can be dismantled in a lot of parts can be collectively redistributed in powers and immunities that can be recombined and can be more complex. So I agree that if we rethink property rights, I might be also an adopter of this proprietarian approach, so to speak.
Thank you, Rafa. Please go ahead, Sara, and then Milton. I think he might want to talk.
Oh, so thank you. I don't know that I have anything to add. I've really been enjoying listening to this. I guess I do have to say, because I'm from the US, the monetization approach is very much individualized. And I absolutely do not think that would work. I think that you just have a notice and consent problem that you have. But the more communitarian aspects of data ownership, especially for common data trusts used in like the public interest that may be leveraged for other public interests, is really interesting to me, both as a proponent of using data for good. Like I am a privacy advocate, but I also believe data is important, and that every time we have these bad ethical or unethical uses of data, that means we can't use data to improve our situation, to innovate, to make things better. So encouraging that trust for these common data uses or common trusts, and moving toward that, I think could be really interesting. I just don't know how that would work in the US context, again, because it's just the assumption once you start commoditizing, it's very individualized.
So I want to say thank you to all of you for letting me share my opinion. I think that we're all learning as we go along, and we must experiment. I believe that there is room for individualized licensing of your data. And then there's certain data that I think is for the common good. And I think, and I hope and I pray that America and all other countries will figure out a way to determine which is the best way to use common good data, but also to allow individuals the freedom to license their data. My grandma used to say, it's not chicken or rice, my son, it's arroz con pollo. So you have to sometimes blend ideas, and two ideas that are diametrically opposed can sometimes coexist, right? And so I want to thank you for your wonderful dialogue, and we'll all keep learning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my ideas.
Thank you to Milton. And I think, Travis, I think you'd like to share some words. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. I mean, first off, thank you. This is a wonderful, super interesting dialogue. I've been thinking about this stuff a lot. And Rafa, I'm super excited to hear that you're working with Trevor. I'll reach out to you. I'll find your contact information. We're also connected to that. I've worked with Collab Cooperative and I'm doing a bunch of stuff in this space right now. I just wanted to share that the thing that I mean, first off, I completely agree with a lot of Ingrid's concerns there. There are some serious dystopian possibilities with this. And I do a lot of work with anti-racist organizing here in the Bay Area and in Oakland. And people in a lot of the communities that I interact with here in Oakland are very concerned about this. They're like, oh yeah, that'll be awesome. Then, there's just another system of control to, force poor people to share all our information while rich people get to keep it all like that. It's definitely something people are thinking about, and it is not something we should lose track of. But we're living in a dystopia already, so it's not like a choice to move from this ideal system to something worse. We're in a bad spot, and so the thing that I've been very interested in lately, well, I guess one thing one dynamic that I find encouraging is that, yes, individual data is worthless. Nobody cares about me, like me specifically, Travis. Like my data is not that interesting to much of anybody. But if I have 200 of my friends with a pretty clear set of demographics and information about who we are, and maybe, personal models that we've trained from our own data that sort of indicate more about us, well, then suddenly we're very interesting to polling companies who'd like to get a sense of how we feel about an election coming up, to medical companies who would like to get a sense of what sort of medical conditions we have and what sort of treatments have been effective in that. As a group, we're very effective. And so, that dynamic where we can only actually get this value if we find ways to come together and cooperate and cooperatively advocate for our rights is very encouraging to me, because it means that if we even want to get any of this value, we're going to have to form institutions like cooperatively run data unions, or whatever we're going to call them, cooperatively run data trusts. I'm super excited and doing a lot of work right now on building that sort of thing around Tim Berners-Lee's new thing, Solid, because it offers a kind of a natural commodity that a co-op can actually run and build itself around. A cooperatively run personal online data store host. The economics make sense. The concept makes sense to people when we explain it. They're like, oh yeah, that sounds good. And the fact that you can use your personal online data store to log into things around the web the same way you do with like Facebook or Google today, and it all is built with the same technology, means that we can build applications today on top of this stuff. So anyway, I don't want to go on too long, but that's where my head is at with all these things. Data is not owned. It's not like anything else. It's a new thing. We need new institutions for it. But fortunately, I think a lot of those institutions look a lot like institutions we already have worked on, even if, what I think is the closest analogy, labor unions are somewhat controversial in this weird world that is 2020. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much, Travis, for sharing your words. Well, I think that we can extend on this topic forever, right? I keep thinking a lot on something that I said at the beginning about some practical applications of some ideas, right? So I think that establishing ownership might be very difficult. For instance, when we talk about personal data, our personal data is very linked to others' data, right? So in some cases, it's very hard to determine who owns that data. There are many experiments. There is, and I'm pretty sure you already know this, Sara, about when parents arrive late to pick up kids at school. So one day, this institution decided to add a fee to those parents that arrived late to pick up the kids. What happened? Parents start picking up kids later, because now they had a way to, let's say, not fulfilling that obligation, right? So this experiment can easily be reproduced with what happens if we give people the possibility to not concern about their privacy. And I think that's also a key pre-legal discussion. The fact that we don't have enough aware people about the importance of their data. So in exchange to a few coins, we are at great risk of people giving their data and creating a licensing, whatever structure you want to give it, to create more inequity. As I said, we can go forever, but I would like to know if Sara or Rafa would like to share some final words, and we can start wrapping up this session.
So when I think about data ownership, I always go back to like values of privacy and data protection, which is autonomy, control, fairness. And I have a hard time squaring what data ownership values, which is again, this very economic principle, with those same principles. Now, I don't think that means a data protection regime or a privacy regime inherently must exclude economic exchanges for data. I don't think that's maybe not necessary. I'd have to see what that might look like. But I worry that by reducing this, again, because I'm from the American system and we do like to do this, reduce everything to an economic consequence, we really obfuscate a lot of other values that are really important to us. I like to say, like, you don't get out of civil rights laws in the US if you pay someone to discriminate against them. That's a harm. But we've decided we're not going to at least try to like allow for payments out of it because that's bad. You don't get like, you don't sell a house, or I mean, you can't have someone build you a house and install lead pipes and say, well, I'll give you a break, 10 grand break on the lead pipes. There are just some things we don't want in the environment because it's toxic. So I want to keep learning about this. I want to keep learning more about data trusts and data unions, but I'm still firmly very skeptical of all of this. But I really appreciate the opportunity to share ideas and learn.
I'd just like to thank you, Gaspar, and the community. And I was so glad that I could hear you all. I was hearing very enthusiastic on YouTube's perspective. Ingrid, she just shared me her presentation of last year, which deals about everything we're talking here. She covered data in the perspective of Jaron Lanier, Morozov, of Elinor Ostrom, Data's Commons. And I was talking with Travis as well, who wrote me. And we certainly will be in touch because he's also advocating and doing things in data as labor and co-ops. I don't have the answers. I'm also a puzzled guy in Brazil, thinking in an NGO, working with data protection and working with the digital economy. And I think that the next decade will have profound transformations. And if we can have also a revolution in the terms of the protocols, this can open new social technical perspectives. I think the legal approach is very limited. I mean, the solution might be in politics and protocols, not only in law. That's why the engagement of the community, the broad perspective, not only the technical community, but the whole society is so important. And I think that, what surprises me is that there is now a common sense about the value of data, which 5 years ago was not possible. Like when I talked to my mother, my father, my friends 5 years ago, it was so hard for them to understand what is the digital economy about. When I explained what I did, my research and my work as an activist, it sounded like something very weird, distant. Like, what do you mean you work with personal data? Like, what is that? And now I think in Brazil, at least, it's very clear for everyone that data is extracted. There is a value of data of the community, that there is something called profiling that works in most of the tech firms. And I think that this is also a very good opportunity, because if we have this common knowledge of what's going on, then we have the basic elements to start designing new institutions. We depend on that, on this knowledge of the community. So I think the next decade, I hope we can come together next year or in 5 years and say, wow, so much has happened in this period of time, because I think it will happen. And thanks for the opportunity of being with you guys.
Okay, folks, thank you so much for participating, especially Sara, Rafael. Thank you so much. And everyone for sharing your thoughts and your words. I think it's been a really interesting, very richful discussion. So yeah, thanks a lot. And as Rafa said, I hope for us to see as soon as possible. Take care.